Hello, everybody. My name is Emily Garrigan. I am a certified wildlife rehabilitator here in Pennsylvania, and the founder of West Shore Wildlife Center down near Harrisburg, for those of you that aren't familiar with us. I am here today during this talk to talk to you about the process of becoming a wildlife rehabilitator so that next year at the conference you get to do the intro that I just did for your own operation. No, but anyway, this is the second of two presentations that I am doing for the PAWR conference this year. The other one is all about things that you should consider before you kind of embark on this process. What really works best for you? Is wildlife rehab for you? Those type of things. So if you are very new to wildlife rehab, so if you're a new volunteer or you've not really yet been involved with another organization, I do definitely recommend checking out that first presentation first before you take a look at this one. And this one will kind of overlap a little bit with just some of that content that we covered in the first one, but it'll be more the nitty-gritty, kind of what comes after you've done some of that soul searching that we talked about in the last one, if that makes sense. Okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll get started, and hopefully this presentation isn't quite as long as my last one, but there's a lot to cover here. There's a lot of good stuff, so we'll roll on. I do have some handouts that go along with this training that I put together for you. So it's just one handout, but it kind of has two different sections to it, but I made it all one document just for everyone's ease. The first portion is all about to do stuff to get permitted as a wildlife rehabilitator. I will say that some of this, both in the talk and in the handout, is very specific to Pennsylvania. So if you are from a different state and you're watching this, just keep in mind that this section here about what the PA Game Commission needs, if you are not in Pennsylvania, your requirements may be very different. So just keep that in mind. We'll talk a little bit about U.S. Fish and Wildlife stuff. That would be the same as far as supply considerations and that kind of stuff. That'll be the same, but the permitting process for your state is going to be different if you're in different states. Right? But I just want to say it now that this is here before I start the presentation, because you don't have to take notes on everything that's going to come up, or if you miss something, this is here for you, plus a little bit of extra information that hopefully I remember to cover in the presentation too, but that is there for you. The other thing that I put in the handouts for this training, which really are helpful for the other one too, are just some of my favorite resources. Again, it's just my personal experience, the stuff that I have found to be really helpful as a young rehabilitator, and learning and expanding and doing all kinds of different wildlife. So I would recommend just taking a look at this, even if you've been a rehabilitator for a while. You might find something that's helpful. So there's print resources in there, a couple podcasts that I like where you can find other conferences. So if you enjoy this and want to do other ones, or online classes, in a world where we can't be together right now, there's lots of online options. So those are listed there, just some hyperlinks and things that I would recommend just personally as an option for you. Okay, so before we really get into the permitting process, I want to first cover the different ways that you can really become a rehabilitator, again, specifically in Pennsylvania, but a lot of this will overlap in other states potentially as well, because there really is not one size fits all option, as there should not be, right? Because everyone's life is different and we have different needs and different ways that rehab can fit into our life. What we are not going to specifically talk about today are those things that are listed there at the bottom of the screen right now. So capture and transport, volunteering on site just as an animal care volunteer, an intern, doing education programs, board service, all of the other ways that you can get involved in wildlife rehab. Those we are not going to talk about today. There's lots of different ways to get involved that way depending on which organizations you want to work with. We're going to specifically talk about how you can become a rehabilitator, right? So this slide is the exact same. If you watch the other presentation, just look very similar. It's the exact same slide, right? So we already kind of talked about this, but I'll go through it now too in case someone didn't watch the other presentation. But the way that I kind of think about it, as far as the ways you can be a rehabilitator, is you can open your own nonprofit wildlife center, right? So that's what we did at West Shore Wildlife Center. We became a 501c3 organization, registered as a nonprofit with the state, all of the stuff that goes into that. If you do want to open up your own wildlife center, you kind of have two flavors in which you can do that. You can specialize, so I'll pick on stuff. So like PA Bat Rescue just does bats, right? You could start just a turtle rescue, or you could do just squirrels, whatever you want to do. Or you can generalize and you can take a little bit of everything, or maybe you take all kinds of birds, right? Or something like that. So you can kind of fall within a spectrum of how specific or how general you want to be, depending on what your knowledge is, what your desires are, what you want to do, and what the needs are in your area. Okay? You also can just be a wildlife rehabilitator. You do not have to start a nonprofit organization. You don't have to take volunteers. You don't have to own a company. You can just be your own person, raising and rehabbing what you can do on your own, or maybe you and a family member, or whatever, you and your best friend, just as like an independent rehabilitator. You don't have to be an organization. You don't have to be open 365 days a year. You can do what works for you. Another option that I think a lot of times is overlooked and partially is not always possible in Pennsylvania because there are so few of us, is that you can become a rehabilitator by joining an existing organization. If you want to be part of a nonprofit, or if you don't have like the space in your home to do it on your own, you can join another organization, right? So there again are two really kind of ways that you can do this that I like to kind of think about it and split it out just in my own head. So you can be a subpermittee. So in Pennsylvania, rehabilitators can list volunteers on their permit with the idea that they're going to provide home care off-site for additional animals, or potentially on-site. Sometimes people designate permittees, subpermittees for on-site care as well. But you're functioning underneath the permit of another rehabilitator. You generally are more heavily involved in the rehab process than maybe just like an on-site volunteer, where you're taking those babies home and doing a large portion of the rehab, but you're working underneath another rehabilitator. Okay? The other option too is to get your own wildlife rehab permits and then work with another organization, whether you again are doing your own location, or if you're on site with them working at an existing location, which is always nice because that's the hardest part, right, is getting yourself all set up. We're going to talk about on the next couple slides then all the pros and cons that at least came to my mind when I think about all of these different choices and options for you, but certainly there are others as well, right? But we'll start with starting a new nonprofit wildlife center. So this is probably the one that's clearest in my mind, just because this is what we just did at West Shores. So this is very recent to me, and I can kind of think about the pros and cons from my point of view. So I think one of the biggest pros, and why a lot of people decide to try and go this route, is because you can potentially get paid, right? If you don't want to do wildlife rehab as a hobby, it's a very professional hobby, even if you do it as a hobby, but if you want to do wildlife rehab 40 hours a week and you need to work so you can pay bills and live, right, like the rest of us, you potentially can get paid if you start a wildlife center, right? We'll talk about this also in actually the cons section of starting a wildlife center, because money just doesn't fall out of the sky, right? People want to support you no matter what ways you decide to rehab, but you need to work for it if you're expecting to be paid for your rehab. Right? So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Another thing that's nice is if you're going to start your own new venture, you have a high level of autonomy. So I can choose, do I want to specialize or do I want to be very general? What animals do I want to take? What systems do I want to use? If I'm starting my own new organization and I'm going to serve as like the executive director or the president of the board, probably have a large say in kind of how that organization works, or at least how it gets off the ground, and then you can set it up the way that you want to, right? So I just, for funsies, put together some logos for you of potential ideas if you're going to start your own nonprofit wildlife center. Here's some ideas for you, right? So if you're over in Tioga County, you could start the turtle triage team in Tioga County, right? So you could specialize in just turtles. If you are in Lancaster County and live in Bird in Hand, we definitely need a Bird in Hand rehab. It does not get any more special than that. So Bird in Hand is a town in Lancaster County. Look at that perfect logo I found for you and everything, right? So feel free to steal that and use that if you're over there in Lancaster County. You could be the kestrel rescue of Conshohocken. You could be very specific and do just kestrels for whatever reason, right? If you love kestrels, and please feel free to take advantage of all those fun names of all the weird towns that we have in Pennsylvania. So kestrel rescue of Conshohocken. Or this one, I really just liked the image that I found for this one. So you could be the silly squirrel nut house wildlife rescue and rehab, right? So you can pick what you want to do. You get to do fun stuff like this, like make logos. Maybe it's just me that enjoys doing that, right? But you can specialize. You don't have to look like what anybody else looks like if you want to, okay? You also, if you're going to start your own rehab, it does improve, I think, the public trust in you, and you get a little bit of the benefit of a corporate veil. So public trust as far as if people call you, if your voicemail just says your name and that's it, hey, this is Emily, leave a message, potentially people are going to be a little bit more turned off from that versus if they call and says, hey, this is West Shore Wildlife Center, this is what we do, whatever. Certainly that's not the case across the board, and certainly like no wildlife center is potentially more trustworthy than like an individual, but it's just something to keep in mind just from a public viewpoint. That's kind of what is just the bias that's there. And then the corporate veil, if you've never heard of that before, that's just really saying that even if I'm still like a one-man show, if I start a nonprofit organization, there's that corporate veil that if someone is not happy with the organization, or they would like try to sue you or try to defame you or whatever, it's the organization that's going to take the hit and not you as the individual. Okay. So again, hopefully that's not even an issue that we ever have to think about, but it is just something to think about. Also, if you're going to start a wildlife center, this is probably one of the biggest benefits, is that the work of rehabbing and running a business and all the fun things that go along with that we talked about in my other presentation, that should be shared across many people, right? It has to be shared at least in some point, because if you are going to incorporate as a nonprofit, you have to have a board of directors that oversees that, is fiscally responsible and those kind of things. So you have at least those people, but potentially you're taking on volunteers. You're going to have donors that are assisting you, right, with funding. The burden of wildlife rehab, not all of that needs to fall on one individual. All right, some of the cons then, I think, of starting your own rehab center is that you do have to fundraise, okay? So if you want to get to the point where you can pay yourself, that is definitely a possibility, and I think should be a goal of everybody. I think rehabilitators should be paid, right, for all the professional training and expertise and stuff that we have to share, but you're going to have to work for that. And people want to support you, but you need to invite them in a way that they can support you and kind of meet people where they are, so they do want to give you all their money so that then you can pay yourself and do this full time if that's what you want to do, right? If you're going to start a wildlife center, you need to really truly be honest with yourself if you are a people person. Okay, so there are some things that go along with wildlife rehab, no matter what form you take it in, where you have to be a people person, right? Your phone's going to be ringing, okay? People are going to be showing up and dropping off animals to you, but there are additional people items that you have to complete and work with on a daily basis if you're going to start a nonprofit, right? So you have donors that are contacting you, you have volunteers that want to join you, whether you're going to agree to take them or not, or how many, or how you want to function that way. You will be a manager of people and a manager of a business as much as you are a rehabilitator. So just keep that in mind. It's starting a wildlife center is only one option to go, and it really is a separate endeavor versus just getting your rehab permits. Okay. There's also a decent amount of startup costs into this. I mean, they're not astronomical in the grand scheme of things, but you do have to pay to like submit your 501c3 tax exemption. If you're going to generalize and take a lot of things, there's a lot of supplies you need. There's a lot of medications, right? You might have to pay permitting and zoning fees if you want to build aviaries and those things. So again, just keep that in mind. You definitely also need the space if you want to start your own wildlife center. So again, you don't have to start with like a big 3,000 square foot facility, but you're going to need space that people can come and bring you animals, that you can set up caging, especially if you're going to generalize and need lots of different caging. You're going to have to store stuff. You need space for volunteers to come in if you're going to take them. So just a consideration, it does take space. And then this one too, again, I really want to emphasize this because I think sometimes, people start with all of the best intentions and don't realize this. If you're going to start a nonprofit, again, starting and running a nonprofit, a business, is a whole separate endeavor on top of being a rehabilitator. You still only have 24 hours in the day, so I can't feed baby rabbits for 23 hours and then work on the nonprofit for 1 hour and then have no time for sleeping, right? So you need to think about that the time that you are spending doing paperwork and fundraising and accounting and maintaining a Facebook page or whatever, that's going to take away time that you potentially would have otherwise dedicated to animal care or spending time with your family, right? If that's where you're going to pull that time with, or sleeping. But it's going to take away time that could have been spent on rehab type stuff. If that's really where your heart is and you just want to do rehab, this might not be the best option for you, or you need to gather a team that somebody else does want to do these things, and then maybe you can be the rehabilitator. All right. So again, just these are the things that came to my mind. It's just fresh going through this, but not the only pros, not the only cons. There's a lot of things to think about here. So let's talk about now if instead of starting a wildlife center, you want to just be an independent rehabilitator. So when I say that, I mean you're not necessarily working directly under another organization. You are working on your own or with a small team, right? If you take on some volunteers and getting your own rehab permits, but you're not necessarily incorporating as a wildlife center, right? You're listed, people can call you if they find animals, but you don't have to do all of the things that we just talked about in the last bullet point or two, right? So again, one of the really nice benefits here is you do still have a high level of autonomy, so even higher than if you're a nonprofit organization. It's potentially just you or just you and a partner or something like that. And you can do whatever you want. So if you want to be closed 6 months out of the year, it's not like you have to answer to donors on why did I donate to you and you close for 6 months of the year, right? If you want to have off for a week to go on vacation, again, you can do that and all of these other aspects as well, but it's just you. You're really responsible for the animals in your care, but you don't necessarily have a lot of those other responsibilities that go along with managing volunteers or a nonprofit and that kind of stuff. Okay? So no business responsibilities. I think I talked about that. The one other thing that I think is really, really nice if you're going to just do rehab and you're just going to do it kind of by yourself is that you really can very quickly become the expert on whatever species you do. So generally, if you're going to kind of just rehab on your own and it's not going to be your full-time job, you probably are not going to take everything, right? You may only take a few species or maybe 1 or 2 species and kind of do a subset there. And you are going to be the one that's caring for those animals hands-on all the time. You're not necessarily designating that to volunteers all the time. It's probably just you. You really can very quickly become an expert on that animal, on that species, on a certain technique that you do all the time because you are the one hands-on doing it. So I will never be the world's best rehabilitator because I really very do less rehab now because I'm doing businessy things and I have volunteers that do a lot of that for us, right? So it's going to take me a long time to get those 10,000 hours needed to master rehabbing rabbits if I'm no longer the one that's rehabbing them on a daily basis, if that makes sense. Okay? So again, just something to think about. And then again, if you really want to do animal care more so than some of those other things, this might be the way to go because you'll be able to do that and set limits and do what you can do and do it well. It's good. All right, some of the cons then. So this does limit your fundraising opportunities. So I think most people would agree, and before we incorporated at West Shore, this is kind of the way that I started, as I was just going to be the crazy lady with bunnies, you know what I mean, in her basement and rehabbing. And people still do want to donate to you and they want to contribute and give supplies, both friends and family, and then also strangers that bring you animals. But you are somewhat limited, right? So you can't apply for like grants unless you're tax exemption status in a lot of cases. And you know, it's not like you can go out and hold a gigantic fundraiser and share your organization and those kind of things. You really are kind of going at it on your own. So you just need to keep that in mind. If you can't be fundraising all the time to get donations and supplies, how are you going to pay for those that you need? Okay. Again, you don't have that corporate veil, so if someone gets mad at you about what you did with the squirrel they brought you, they're going to be mad at you. Okay, they know your name, your phone number's out there, those kind of things. Okay. Again, you do have to have the space, so similar to like if you're going to start your own rehab somewhere, you have to have space to do that if you're not joining another organization. Okay, and again, taking all types of wildlife really can be difficult if you're just going to do it on your own. To maintain the amount of supplies that needs is difficult, and then if you're only one person, it's not like you can take 3,000 animals a year, right? You need to kind of limit in some shape or form what it is that you're going to do. Okay, so now we can talk about kind of joining another organization. So either as a subpermittee, where you're going to take animals home and do home care for them and raise them and release them working with an existing rehabilitator, or if you're going to get your own permits and like have a job or volunteer on site as a rehabilitator with another organization. So again, I have done both of these. So I was a rehabilitator with Tamarack Wildlife Center for a short period of time, and I have done some subpermittee stuff when I was training with Raven Ridge Wildlife Center. So again, these are kind of the pros and cons that I came up with for this. This is going to look very different for every organization. So every organization looks at their subpermittees differently and does different things with them, or they may have like an ideal number of rehabilitators. They might not need more, right? Or they may need a lot more. So just keep in mind, if this is the route you want to go, you do need to kind of start building that relationship with an organization so it's a possibility for you. Okay? One of the big pros for this is if you are not a people person, if you do not want to have to do phone calls all day long for your whole life, 7 days a week, if you're going to especially subpermittee for another organization, they should be admitting those animals and triaging them and dealing with the people and maybe giving them the updates on the animals. You just need to do the animal care and get them back out there, right? If you're working as like a job on site, potentially you're doing some of that, but again, that work is probably shared across multiple people. It's not just you all the time, always on. Doing the rehab and answering phone calls and all those fun things. Dealing with the public, that is nobody's favorite thing. Okay. Of course, job possibilities. So again, in Pennsylvania, there are so few of us that there's not a lot of times that there's job possibilities, but they do happen, and they certainly do happen elsewhere in the United States and around the world, that there are jobs you can apply for as a wildlife rehabilitator and go and have a career as a rehabilitator, right? I also think it's nice if you're going to be a subpermittee or work with another organization, you have that built-in support network. So if I get sick and I'm a subpermittee, I already know where my animals are going to go. They're going to go back to that permitted rehabilitator, right? If I am working with like a team of rehabilitators or join an existing organization and something happens that I can't come in for a shift, whether it's a job or I'm volunteering, there's probably systems in place for how we can get that covered, right? Sure, let's just use a personal example. So this past year in 2020, twice I got very sick, and one of those times did not have any volunteers, so I still had to do animal care for many baby animals while being very sick because there was nobody else. They were my responsibility, right? And certainly we are really good at networking, and we probably could have transferred those animals out if we needed to, but we made it work. So just keep in mind, there are no days off, right? If you're your own independent rehabilitator, unless you kind of pre-build those in, you do have to plan ahead for that kind of thing. Definitely reduce startup costs. So if you're going to work on site somewhere with somebody else, they probably already have a facility, they have supplies, they have donor networks built in, that kind of thing. If you're going to subpermittee, again, every organization is different as far as if you're expected to fund that yourself, or if the nonprofit that you're working with is going to supply you with items. Hopefully, at least somewhat, they can assist you with that, if not completely. Some of the cons then, though, you might be limited in kind of what you can do on your own. So if you're taking a job, those job responsibilities and roles are probably already defined for you. If you're going to subpermittee, you can only take home the animals that the permanent rehabilitator wants you to take home. You don't get to like have your pick of whatever you want to take and whatever you want to do. You know, if your organization is going to take possums, then maybe you're doing possums, right? So certainly I would hope that you would be able to work with them, but you might not have the total final say there. Okay. You may not be able to take volunteers, and you may not be able to admit animals directly. So again, if you're working with an existing organization, they probably have some kind of admission process. They probably have some protocol for taking on volunteers. So if I'm doing home care for baby squirrels or baby birds or something like that, I might not be able to take my own volunteers, which does mean that I potentially have less help. But again, if you are not a people person, that might be a pro to you. If you don't want to manage volunteers, and again, you just want to do it on your own, that might not be a terrible thing, right? But again, that might just not be an option there for you depending on how your organization is set up. The last thing here that we'll kind of talk about on this note, I think it's the last slide, is how pros and cons are kind of split when you're thinking about, do I want to specialize? Do I want to do just one kind of species, or do I want to generalize and do a little bit of everything? Again, these are the pros and cons that I thought of. There are definitely way more than the things that are here, right? So if you're going to specialize, even if you're going to start a nonprofit organization and maybe have to split your time away from animal care somewhat, you definitely can become the expert. So if I am a turtle rescue, probably people are going to look to me to be the expert on lots of things related to turtles, right? So it's easier for you just to become the expert, and you kind of have that platform that this is all that I do, this is what I know, and you can get really good at it, which is nice. Definitely, if you're going to specialize, there are fewer costs and space that are needed just across the board. Even if you decide to specialize and take deer fawns, which are one of the more expensive and space needing animals that we can rehab here in Pennsylvania, because I only need supplies for deer fawns and I don't also need supplies for raccoons and foxes and squirrels and birds and reptiles, the costs are going to be much less to me, and I'm going to need less space, even just storage wise, to store caging for all of those animals and have caging set up in the backyard specific to raccoons and to deer, and those kind of things. So that is definitely a big pro as well. Another nice thing is if you're going to specialize, it may limit how busy you're going to be. Certainly if you're going to take stuff that's common like baby songbirds or baby squirrels, baby possums, baby bunnies, you are going to be busy, still that kind of bulk busy time of the year, March through September, right, or a little bit longer. But if I'm only taking birds of prey, your busy season is going to shift to be more towards the end of the year when those juveniles are leaving the nest and doing all the dumb things that juveniles do, right? You're still going to get injured adults, you're still going to get like nestlings in the spring and in the summer, but your busy season will be different. If you're going to take reptiles, you are going to be very, very busy in the summer months, and then in the winter months, you may see next to nothing. No one's going to be calling you about turtles that are hit by cars. You're going to maybe get a handful disturbed from hibernation or found in houses. All our amphibians are found in houses in the winter, but it's not going to be en masse like it is in the summer. So then you kind of can split yourself that way, which I think is nice. Definitely the con, though, is that you have to say no to a lot of animals, right? So potentially even animals that you want to work with, if you're not set up to do them or you've decided that you don't want to do them, you have to say no. Right? And there's ways that you can set yourself up and screen calls on voicemail so that you don't have to be the one to say no all the time, but you do have to say no. Okay? If you're going to generalize, the flip side of that is you can help tons of animals. You get to say yes to lots of people, and you get to take in lots of animals as long as you can appropriately manage that through the time that you have and the volunteers or the manpower that you personally can give. You can potentially help a lot of different animals. It also, I think, a big pro that we should never discount is that gives you a variety of experiences. So we like to do different things. It is still very exciting to me when we get in something that's different that I've never worked before, even if it's like to other people the lamest animal ever. If it's something new or it's like a new problem that I have to figure out as the rehabilitator, that is very exciting. So if you're going to take a lot of different species, you get just a little bit more of that. Okay? Cons then, I guess it's really kind of the opposite of specializing. So you're going to need a lot of caging. You're going to need a lot of space to house these animals and to maintain all of their different needs across different ages and different species and all of those kind of things. Okay. There's also a readiness cost that's built in. So if you specialize, you have to be ready for any animal that could potentially come in. So you could like almost never get in loons. But if you're going to take loons, you better have appropriate setup for them when they do come in, right? So that costs space, that costs actual money, that costs time to maintain those supplies, potentially for things that are not adding a ton of value, but you got to have it because who knows what's going to come through the door. Okay. And then again, if you're going to generalize, we still do have kind of that busy core season of the summer when everything's active and having babies, and that's pretty generalized. A little bit slower in the winter, but you probably are going to stay fairly busy throughout the year overall, more or less, right? So the next section that I want to talk about are the ethics and laws related to wildlife rehab. So again, these are going to be kind of true now across the board for every one of those types that we just talked about and kind of the ways that you can do it. just some considerations as far as legal aspects, ethical aspects, because that's pretty important to know before we jump into permitting, which is its own legal aspect as well, right? So I want to go through just kind of quickly. Oh, I cut off their logo. Sorry, NWRA. The Wildlife Rehabilitators Code of Ethics from the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association. So I mentioned them in my other presentation as well. They put out a lot of good info that's really general to rehabilitators across the country, and they put out a code of ethics for us that really should be the gold standard for rehabilitators, and the minimum standard maybe is really the way that should be written. Okay, so this is just some of the highlights from that. Again, you can get it on their website, the whole thing, so that it's there for you. There's also one for wildlife educators as well. If you are doing that or thinking about doing that, they have a code of ethics for educators too. But anyway, so the first bullet point here, you want to strive for a high standard of care through knowledge and continuing education. Okay, so that's why you're here today, whether you're new to rehab or you're a rehabilitator that's been rehabbing forever, you want to continue your education. Rehab is changing all the time as we learn more. It really is still a very new field, and thankfully is growing, and we're learning more and more, which is really good. It's also why I put in the handouts that section on continuing education, because it is so important. I wanted to share some of those resources, especially for those of you that are new, so you can kind of think about where you might get that knowledge as you're getting the hands-on training that you really need, right? So rehabilitators, they're responsible, conscientious, and dedicated to improving care. Again, that's through the continuing education piece. We always want to strive to be responsible in the care that we are giving animals, knowing our limits, knowing where to find information if we don't have it, and then always improving our care kind of as we go through and learn and grow and expand and those kind of things. Definitely abiding by the laws, okay? So that's a non-negotiable. If you're going to be a wildlife rehabilitator, you cannot break the laws, whatever that might be, from the Game Commission, U.S. Fish and Wildlife. You need to follow those if you're going to rehab, okay? Safe work conditions and habits. So for yourself, for the protection of yourself, if you're going to take volunteers, you need to help establish that for your volunteers that maybe don't know any better, or you need to be providing the PPE and those kind of things that they need, and also for the protections of others around you, right? So if I don't know, I'm like doing a necropsy on a diseased animal and then come into the home where my family lives with bloody, disgusting clothes, potentially I'm spreading now biohazards everywhere. So just be aware that you want to kind of understand biosecurity and disinfectants and how you need to protect yourself and others and the animals in your care as well. Acknowledge limits and enlist the help from a vet or other professionals. This is a huge one. Just because you get your wildlife rehab permits or just because you've been rehabbing for 25 years, you still have limits. You have limits on what your knowledge and your skill base is, and you have limits on how many animals and what animals you can really care for. So it's important to kind of just check yourself before you start rehab, so you kind of have a baseline for what those limits are, and then continuously check yourself as you're rehabbing. Do I need a veterinarian? Do I need to transfer this to another animal, or can I manage it at my organization or at my home? Do I need to reach out to somebody for advice? Do I not even know if I can handle this or not? Do I need to contact somebody and get that input? And that's not a bad idea ever for any reason, but it's important to not try and just go alone and do everything on your own. You need to consider what you're really trained for, what you can really do, right? Respect other rehabilitators and cooperate. So this is a huge one, and I would like to think there's a no tolerance policy for this, definitely within Pennsylvania and hopefully beyond. Definitely you hear about this all the time for anyone that's involved in the rescue world. I mean, just little stupid stuff between different organizations. This organization does things that I don't like, or they, don't walk their dogs as many times a day as my organization does, or whatever. There are going to be differences of opinion, and those are not wrong. Potentially there are lots of best ways to do things, and again, wildlife rehab is a very new field. There's no black and white hard data. This is the only way to raise a baby squirrel. So you want to make sure that you are respectful of other rehabilitators, and we can debate things in a respectful way, and that you cooperate with them, right? So if I have space to take in a baby possum and another rehabilitator is asking me to help them, if I can do that, I should be willing to do that, right? We're doing it for the animals. There's no like infighting that should be happening or hoarding of animals, those kind of things, right? We want to cooperate for the animals for what's best for our wildlife. Okay? Optimal animal care over personal gain. So this is true whether you're going to be just a personal rehabilitator or if you're going to start an organization. The animals in your care, when you're thinking about a wildlife rehabilitator's code of ethics, need to come first. So you may get in the coolest animal, or you think that has a lot of fundraising potential, or you really, really want to rehab it. You need to think about what that animal needs, what their care needs are, rather than your own needs. Okay? And again, you need to follow laws, even if you really want to hold on to an animal and not release them, or you want to do things that maybe make you feel good but are not best for the animal's well-being overall when they're going to be released. You need to think about that animal, not your personal gain. Okay. All right, respect wildness, maintain dignity. Non-releasable animals have a right to euthanasia. That is a big piece, and I think that's newer than kind of the original code of ethics that was added in, but that is a big one for me, and this is maybe where you need to check yourself most often, because we are animal lovers. We love these animals. We get attached to them, just in my personal experience, but every wild animal that is non-releasable has a right to euthanasia, just because we don't want to, because we like that animal. If they cannot live a quality of life in captivity, they have a right to euthanasia, even if it feels like garbage to us. We need to set aside that human personification and what our wants are, and think about the wild instincts that are just inherent in that animal and the things that we can't change and what their life is going to look like. Okay. Encourage community support. So as a rehabilitator, you should be an advocate for people bringing animals to wildlife rehabilitators, right? You should encourage people to support their local rehabilitators, to bring them animals, to donate to them, to network with them, to learn more, to become a rehabilitator, right? You should be an advocate for everybody in the field and do that in a good professional way. All of your rehab practices should have a foundation in ecological principles and conservation. So that really is one of the benefits that wildlife rehabilitators bring to the table versus like an injured animal just going to a veterinarian, right? We know what that animal does in the wild, where they need to live, what they need to do, what their breeding behaviors look like, and then we can make good decisions for that animal, both as an individual, and we can consider conservation problems as a whole and population impacts and those type of things. We also get to see some of those conservation concerns like as a boots on the ground kind of person, and then we can share those concerns and our recommendations and provide education to both the public and to professionals as well, which I think is good. And then, of course, we want to conduct all of our business as rehabilitators in a professional manner, because you are representing yourself. If you are not acting professionally, I mean, the public's not going to want to bring you animals. In the world of social media, that info spreads faster than sometimes we want it to or it needs to. So you want to make sure that you're acting professionally for yourself, and then you also are representing rehabilitators as a whole. So if this is the first baby animal that anyone's ever found, and someone that's a rehabilitator does not treat them in an appropriate way, they're probably going to make a generalization about rehabilitators as a whole. So there is just that level of responsibility there. As a new profession, we want to make sure that we're sharing good practices with the public. So this slide here, these are the 5 freedoms. So this is actually developed from like a captive animal standpoint. I think it originally developed related to farm animals, and then was also adopted by like the Humane Society and SPCA and domestic animal rescues as well. But I do think that this is just a good thing to like another tool in your toolkit to keep in the back of your mind when you're thinking about making good ethical decisions in wildlife rehab. Not necessarily legal decisions in this case, but definitely ethical ones. These 5 freedoms are the 5 freedoms of captive animals, whether that's animals that are staying with you permanently as non-releasables, or if they're ones that are just temporarily in captivity as rehab patients, right? And I would say that these are the minimums, okay? I think everyone would agree on that, and that it's not always possible, right? So freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, injury, or disease, freedom to express normal behavior, freedom from fear and distress. Okay. If an animal comes into me and has been hit by a car, I cannot make them be free from injury. But what I can do is I can prevent new injuries. I can treat them for existing injuries, treat them for pain, to minimize that the best that I can. I can't potentially minimize their discomfort with having to be in rehab. I can't always allow them to express those normal behaviors that they want to express if they have to be on cage rest, but I can allow it as much as I can safely, knowing what I know as a rehab and a medical standpoint for that animals. It's also important to consider when you are thinking about what animals may be good candidates that are not able to be released to stay in captivity. If these 5 minimums cannot be met, if they cannot express most of their normal behaviors, if they don't have freedom from fear and distress, that animal is not going to be a good choice as an education ambassador for placement in like a zoo on display or something. Again, that could be a whole separate talk as well that maybe we'll think about sometime, but again, just something to think about because that does happen in rehab. You do get animals that are non-releasable, and you want to consider, do I need to euthanize that animal, or potentially is there wiggle room for like an education program or placement? This is another one. So this I actually saw at the Virginia Wildlife Conference last year. They're called the Wild Conference, related again to educational ambassadors and non-releasable animals, but this is the 5 opportunities to thrive. And I really think that this is a good new standard that is kind of the next step above those 5 freedoms. So the 5 freedoms are the minimums that we need to hit for non-releasable animals and that we need to try to be hitting for rehab animals. This is a good standard for the optimum. So the ability to have a well-balanced diet, to self-maintain for optimal health, to express species-specific behaviors, and the opportunities for choice and control. So can I offer an animal these opportunities, whether in rehab or as a non-releasable, right? So we can give them a well-balanced diet. We could just throw whatever food at them and they may survive, right, and do okay. But can I give them a well-balanced diet? Can I allow them to self-maintain? So can you give them dust baths and things that they want to do to maintain themselves as they normally do, to express those natural behaviors? Can you offer them choice and some control over their environment in a way that's safe to do so? Okay. So again, just things to think about from an ethical standpoint and thinking about rehab decisions that you want to make when you're at that point. These are kind of some of the considerations that we take in as rehabilitators. All right, so those are kind of our ethics, the standards that kind of I look to when I'm thinking about rehab decisions. Now let's talk about laws, okay? So the very first thing that's most important is you must have permits to be a rehabilitator, or you are a listed subpermittee under an existing rehabilitator. Okay, so again, I can't just go pick up a squirrel from my backyard. I could purchase every book that I want to related on squirrel rehab. I could take a whole class on it, but if I don't have the appropriate permits, then I don't get to rehab, right? So we're going to talk about, again, specifically what you need to do to get permitted. On the next couple of slides, we'll go into that in a decent amount of detail. Or you can get listed under somebody else's permit or be volunteering with them, but you need to make sure that you are listed appropriately and that you and that rehabilitator are following all the laws appropriately. If you want to keep non-releasable wildlife, there are additional permits required for that as well. So even if you have a rehab permit, you cannot keep animals that you know are not going to be able to be released back into the wild. Okay, there are state and federal permits that go along with that. Again, we're going to touch on that just a little bit. I think I have a slide on that or two, but this is mostly going to be focused on rehab, so we're not going to talk about how to get your permits to have non-releasable wildlife, and there's lots of different flavors there again too, but keep that in mind. Just because you are a rehabilitator does not mean that you can keep animals that cannot be released. If you want to take rabies vector species, so what was it, raccoons, skunks, groundhogs, foxes, coyotes, and bats in Pennsylvania, you need to take an additional rabies training that goes into some of the rehab considerations, and then also some of like the zoonotic disease and the laws and things like that. So you need to take that training, that state training and apply for those permits if you want to take rabies vector species. So just because I'm permitted for mammals does not mean that I can take raccoons. I need that additional training. And if you want to take threatened and endangered species, there's an additional training for that as well. That one I know is online through Wildlife EDU with Red Creek Wildlife Center and Peggy Hentz that you can take. At least it was a few years ago when I took that one. The rabies training, I'm not 100% sure if they're doing that, you know, I mean, with social distancing and all those fun things that are happening right now. But if you are at a point where you're ready for those permits, then definitely reach out to the Rehab Council and ask them how you can get that training. All permitted wildlife rehabilitators can admit any animal for transfer to another rehabilitator. So if I don't have permits for birds, and someone shows up on my doorstep with a bird, or my neighbor down the street finds a bird and brings it to me, you can take that animal, but you do need to transfer it to a permitted wildlife rehabilitator. So I believe it's 24 hours is what you have to transfer them, right? And sometimes, you know, I mean, we are very far apart in Pennsylvania. You at least in that 24 hours need to have contact with the rehabilitator that's going to admit that animal and kind of start that train rolling. But you can take it. Even if I don't have training to take rabies vector species, if a member of the public shows up with a baby raccoon, you should have a basic understanding of the questions to ask them and take that animal so that a professional who knows what they're doing and has the network of rehabilitators has it and not a member of the public. Okay? Or you at least have the option to do that. So just again, something to keep in mind. You can't keep it and rehab it if you don't have permits, but if you have any state rehab permits, you can take that animal at least temporarily. Okay, last thing too, this is sometimes just a hard pill to swallow and not something that is always thought about. The state and federal agencies that give us these permits, they are our bosses, right? They don't pay us. We don't get any funding from them. You know, I mean, they're not telling us what we can and can't do as far as most rehab decisions, but they are our bosses. So if my game warden shows up and he says, I want to confiscate all of the raccoons in your care for whatever reason, he's a good guy, so I'm sure he would have some kind of reason. But if the Game Commission says that, that's what we're doing, right? If the Game Commission says they're no longer allowing deer rehabilitation in the entire state of Pennsylvania, then that is what we are doing, right? We have to follow any laws and regulations that they put in. Your game warden or fish and boat officer that's overseeing your permits, they are the boss. They are the ones that issue the permits. They get to make some of those decisions too, which most of them, I will say, are very reasonable and good people and would not just like show up and take all of your animals, right? But you do need to keep that in mind. If they make decisions for whatever reason in good faith, then we get to follow those. Last one here too. I thought the last one was the last one. Here's one more. You cannot charge for wildlife rehab services. So even if you're going to create a company and a wildlife center, you cannot charge people to bring you animals. You cannot charge them for the care that they need and the food and the whatever. You are offering that as a free public service. You can accept donations. You can charge for other services. So if you do things not related to, related to wildlife rehab maybe, but not specific rehabilitating animals. So if you provide education services or your services in other capacities, you can charge for that, but you cannot charge to rehab an animal. We don't want people that don't have the money to pay $100 to bring you a baby squirrel to just then keep it on their own or, put it back outside and not get it anywhere. Want them to come in, and if it's something that you can't handle, then we network and we get it somewhere else. But you can't make somebody pay you a fee to bring you a wild animal. Okay, that is in the regulations. That is the law. Okay. All right, so let's go through then those permitting requirements and how you can actually get to the point where you have your own permits and can start rehabbing. So there are lots of different types of rehab permits, right? In an ideal world, it'd probably be just like one thing and it'd be really straightforward, but it's not. That's the way it goes, but it's not as overwhelming and as daunting as it seems, okay? So in the state for wildlife rehab, there are permits for raptors and for non-raptors. So non-raptors would be like songbirds, water birds, pigeons, doves, those kind of things. There are permits for mammals. There are permits for reptiles and amphibians. There are permits for rabies vector species and for threatened and endangered species. Okay. We already talked about the RVS and the threatened and endangered species. There are additional trainings you need to do for that. And those permits are through the Game Commission, which give us our permits as well for mammals, raptors, and non-raptors. If you're going to do raptors or non-raptors, you also need a federal permit. So any migratory bird, really pretty much any bird other than like turkeys, and some of the non-native species like house sparrows and starlings, you need a federal permit for every other kind of bird other than like those very few examples. So if you're going to do birds, you need to also have a federal permit. Okay? If you want to do reptiles and amphibians, that is through the Fish and Boat Commission. So that is not through the Pennsylvania Game Commission. Fish and Boat does fish and reptiles and amphibians. You also need a fishing license if you're going to do reptiles and amphibians. I don't know why, it's just what Fish and Boat has decided. So just keep that in mind as well. It's not very expensive. I mean, you just pay for it and you have it. But you need a fishing license. You need to maintain that every year in addition to your reptiles and amphibians permit if you want to do them, right? And you do not have to get all of these. If I just want to do reptiles, I can just get a reptile permit. If I just want to do birds of prey, owls and eagles and hawks and things, I can just get a raptor permit from the state and from the feds. You don't have to do all of these. You can do a subset of any of these. The other thing that I want to mention is through the Pennsylvania Game Commission for their mammals and their birds, there are two permits. There is a novice permit and a general rehabilitation permit. Your novice permit is where you start as a new rehabilitator, and that allows you to have more time to gain skills, to get your facilities, you know what I mean, the way that you want to do, while you can actively take animals from the public and rehab the animals that you're permitted for. It's 2 years after you have your novice permit. You should then be applying for your general permit, and there are requirements that go into that. Do I have a slide on that? We'll see. I think I have a slide on that later on that talks about some of those requirements. If not, they're in the regulations for you, and you get to apply to get your general permit, and that opens up some more opportunities for you. So that's where you can take rabies vector species or threatened and endangered species if you have the training for it. You have some more possibilities of subpermitting that you can have. So again, just keep in mind there's kind of 2 stages. There's not a ton of differences between the 2, but eventually within the first few years of rehabbing, everyone should have that general permit. So this is the way that we are set up from the Pennsylvania Game Commission for their rehab permits. So that's the ones that we'll talk about first. So birds and mammals, raptors, non-raptors, and mammals. When you think that you're ready to go, first thing you want to do is you want to contact your regional office and ask them for the application packet to get permitted. So this is kind of the way that it's set up. This is just the map from the Game Commission website, so you can kind of see, are you in the Northwest, North Central, Northeast, Southwest, South Central, or Southeast. On their website, you can find that contact info and say, hey, I would like to apply for my rehab permits. Can I have the application for a special permit? I'll send it to you, right? This is what it looks like here. It's not a super detailed form. It really is only like a page or 2 long, and it wants things like your name, what permit it is that you're applying for, your general training and your knowledge and those kind of things. It's not a ton of information on this form itself, so we do need to send in some additional paperwork with it. That again, that information is listed with the application packet, what you need to send in, but it's not just the form alone. There's more that needs to go with it. Okay? So other things when you're getting ready to send in the application to the Game Commission, other things that you're going to send with them is a letter stating that you want to be a rehabilitator, right? That's where you can explain your experience. You've trained under this rehabilitator, you attended the PAWR 2021 conference, you've taken these classes, you have these degrees, right? Whatever you think that your qualifications are that show that you have some hours worth of training with a rehabilitator and you know kind of what you're doing, whether that's in Pennsylvania or beyond, right? You maybe rehab somewhere else or whatever. Just saying these are what I want to take as far as the test. This is what I want to get permitted for. This is what I'm doing. So it's like a cover letter essentially, right? If you've ever had to write one of those for a job. You also then need to send in a letter from your township, wherever it is that you're going to be rehabbing, whether that's at your home or if you're like purchasing a location or rehabbing somewhere else. You need a letter from the township where that will be located, just stating that there are no ordinances prohibiting wildlife rehab. They don't have to say, we are super excited to have this rehabilitator and can't wait to have wild animals in the township. They don't have to say, we are permitting this. They just have to say that there are currently no ordinances existing that would prevent you from getting your rehab permits. Okay? So this is the letter that we got from our township that satisfied the requirement for the Game Commission. So townships no standalone ordinances, you're permitted to take in wildlife rehab. You're probably going to have to explain to your township what wildlife rehab is, especially if there's never been one there before. So we had to explain animals are housed indoors. It's not like we have fencing like horse farms. If they're outside, it's just for acclimation and escape-proof caging, right? In that last little bit of their care, it's not like we have loud animals housed outside, right? They're outside for a little bit, and they're escape-proof and contained in that whole process. So that process that we explained to them, they put that in their letter because they did want to make it clear that was something that was important to them. And then there's, them just saying there's no ordinances and they can be contacted for additional zoning requirements. Okay. For some people, this is really the hardest stage of the game. You wouldn't think that it's the hardest, but it is sometimes the hardest. So I took my rehab permit test and got originally permitted with Tamarack Wildlife Center, an existing wildlife rehab, and worked with them. So I did not have to do this stage because they already existed. We already knew that rehab was allowed in the township because it was happening. But when I relocated home to York County where we are now, we needed to get this letter for our new location. Even though I already had my permits, I was moving to a new location. The Game Commission, in order to transfer that location of my permits, needed this letter from the township. It took us about 9 months, something like that, to transfer our permits. By and large, the delay because of this letter. So the township originally was like, oh yeah, we'll write it, whatever. They kind of backwalked that a little bit. They got really confused. They wanted us to do like a zoning hearing that was going to cost us $750. Eventually, I was just annoying enough and read the zoning regulations and ordinances myself and told them, hey, I already figured this out for you, and this is the wording that I want you to use, and write me a letter, and they did that. But it's not easy, and just be prepared. You may have to kind of go to bat for yourself, and other rehabilitators are willing to go to bat for you as well. So if your township's going to be annoying and there's things that we can do to support you, other rehabilitators, the council is definitely willing to do that, and they were definitely willing to go to bat for me as well. Luckily, we didn't have to do that. We didn't have to do like a zoning hearing or anything, but just keep that in mind. Because just from my personal experience, this was like where I was about to throw in the towel and like just forget rehab altogether. But it is just one of the things you have to do. Or you might have a really awesome township and they might send you an email same day and then you're good to go, right? Who knows? Okay, so we have those two things that we're going to send in. The next thing that you want to send in with your application to the Game Commission here in PA is a letter from a sponsoring rehabilitator. It's just a rehabilitator saying that they are familiar with your training, they have worked with you, they're willing to support you, right? They're going to sponsor you to get your permits. Okay, so it should be somebody that you at least have some kind of working relationship with, ideally probably someone that you trained with hands-on if you got your training here in Pennsylvania. So just keep that in mind. It's not like any, again, old person off the street can apply for a rehab permit and get it and pretend that they have experience that they don't. You need to have another rehabilitator say, yes, they do have experience, they do have the training that they need. Other thing that you're going to need is a letter from a veterinarian saying that they are willing to see your patients and to work with you. Okay? This I thought would be like the worst part, maybe because I don't like asking for things. I was like, how am I going to find a veterinarian that's going to see my wildlife? Like, how does this even happen? It really was not bad at all. I think is it the next slide? Let's look. It is the next slide. So the best way to find a veterinarian is just to ask. So if you already have a veterinarian for like your personal wildlife, ask them. Say, hey, would you be willing to see my wildlife patients? If you don't have a veterinarian or you don't have one that like sees exotic animals, just go Google vet offices near you, read the biographies online of these veterinarians and see who has a wildlife background, who did an externship at Tri-State and puts it in their bio, in their vet bio at their job now, right? That probably means that wildlife's pretty important to them. Who did an externship at Wildlife Center, Virginia? Who sees exotic animals? Who sees reptiles and rabbits and those kind of things that they already have kind of that part of their vet brain turned on, that every species is different, right? That's what you want to look for. You know, I mean, worst case scenario, you find somebody that just normally does cats and dogs and is willing to learn and do more wildlife. But ideally, it's someone that at least has some wildlife experience or sees exotic like pet animals, kind of things. And then you just ask them. So you just send them a letter, you send them an email, you call them and you say, hey, would you be willing to see my wildlife patients? And again, you might have to go to bat for yourself. You may have to explain what wildlife rehab is. You may need to explain that you will pay for their services. You will make an appointment like any other customer, right? It's not like you're asking them to give their services away for free unless they would like to do that. But you need a veterinarian to work with. It really is one of the most important relationships that you need as a rehabilitator is that veterinarian. You cannot get any prescription medications without that relationship. You shouldn't be like prescribing meds without that veterinary oversight. If you get something in that has like a broken leg that needs surgery, unless you have that veterinary training, it's probably not something that you're going to be able to do. You need that existing relationship with some veterinarian, whether it's with yours or if you're going to be working with yours, like whether it's one that you find on your own or if you're going to be working with another organization and maybe can work with the veterinarian that they work with, or you could ask people who they work with if their vet is taking, you know, we new clients, new rehabilitators that way, but you need that relationship and you need it to be a good one. So this has been one of the biggest benefits for us, is we have a really great relationship with 2 different veterinary offices. They provide us some discount on supplies and things and on their services, and they're always willing to work with us. So even one of our veterinarians, I can email her and say, hey, this is what we're seeing. Should this come in for an appointment, or is this something that we can care for on our own? And she can say, yeah, I'd like to get hands on that animal. We pay the office visit fee and we do that. Or she can say, oh no, you can use this standard protocol that we use for cat attacks, or this is how I would bandage this and just let it heal on cage rest. So it's not always, you know, I mean that you have to be going there, but if you can develop that relationship, they may be willing to show you things and work with you in a different way. Okay, so it's a checkbox for the permitting requirements, but it is also an important piece just as a rehabilitator. Okay? So that's my soapbox for that. Okay, so you've got all of your application stuff together, that whole packet, and you send that in. Now you're kind of ready for the next steps. So potentially a game warden will come out and schedule a site visit with you. Because I got permit at another organization probably is why I didn't have to do this. And even when I transferred, my current game warden, he came out not long after I got permitted, but didn't necessarily beforehand. But that is one of the things that's potential, that they might come out and do that just to interview you and do a site visit and those things. And then after they're basically like accepting your application, then you get to take state tests. Okay, so there are 3 state tests, one for each of the permits. So there's one for mammals, there's one for raptors, and there's one for non-raptors, so those songbirds, water birds, those kind of things. You don't have to take all 3. You also don't have to take all 3 at the same time. If you think that you do want to take all 3 eventually, you can just pick 1 or 2, and that's part of that cover letter that you'll lay out, is you'll say, hey, these are the tests that I want to take. Okay. They cover a bunch of different information, so this is just stuff that I could kind of think of off the top of my head that would be on the test. So like regulation stuff, common diseases, identification, common calls as in like people that call you about wildlife, not bird calls, but people that call you about wildlife and how you should handle that. A little bit of like medical math, so if your vet tells you, hey, this is the dosage or this is the amount of fluids you want to do, can you calculate that? And then some husbandry type things, housing and diets and that kind of stuff. Okay. I found these tests not to be overly challenging if you have a decent amount of wildlife rehab experience and you have the experiences that you need to be a wildlife rehabilitator, right? If you are not ready for the tests, then you are not ready to be a rehabilitator. The tests are not going to cover everything, so you may be ready for the test and not ready to kind of go it on your own. It's not, I mean, it's not the end all be all. But it is a minimum, and I think they're set up pretty well. Just from my experience, there's random questions that are on them, I think. Maybe I just made that up. But anyway, it's different questions on all three that you get to take and pass those, and you'll be good to go. But I don't want you to be overly stressed because they are doable if you know what you're doing, right? It's not like you have to study for them and be crazy. If you've been rehabbing and training, you should be in a good shape and have a good rehabilitator that you were working with, right? So PAWR.com has some resources as well that they like to recommend. And then again, that listing that I have at the end, overkill. It's more than you would need for these tests, but it has some good resources there too. Okay. Once you finish your tests, then it's time for you to meet with the Rehab Council. So with the State Rehab and Education Council, it's a group of rehabilitators, there's a veterinarian, our special permits officer from the Game Commission is on it. It's a group of people that really they're there to be an advocate for wildlife rehabilitators and to be that connection between the rehabilitators and the PA Game Commission, since they are the permitting office for mammals and birds. Okay. So when you go to meet with the Rehab Council, ahead of time you want to submit photos and or videos of your facility so that they can provide you some feedback, right? So what caging do you have? Where are you kind of set up in your house? What does your facility look like? Indoor, outdoor, whatever you have. You want to submit that to them. And then this also allows you to kind of introduce yourself to the council if not all of them know you or if none of them know you. It also is an excellent opportunity to ask questions. So if you are confused on some of the regulation things, you definitely need to read those before you take the test. If you are unsure on like what your next step should be, on kind of how rehab is set up in PA, right? If you're new to it or you are more accustomed to a different state, that is your opportunity to pick those people's brains, which is really, really nice, and to have all of them there access to you, whether it's virtually now as we've been doing things or in person. Sometimes people find this to be intimidating, but it is not. It should not be intimidating. These people want you to get your permits, right? They don't want to take in 7,000 animals a year. They want you to get your rehab permits and take in animals and fill in the gaps that are still there and support their mission, which is wildlife rehab and is your mission as well. So again, they're there to support you and to assist you. So I do have a slide on novice versus general. Look at that, past me, was thinking ahead. Okay, so I think I already covered some of this. So you start as a novice permit and then you upgrade to your general permit. It should be within 2 years that you're upgrading to that general permit. And when you are ready to upgrade, that's when you need to make sure that you have dedicated pre-release caging to share those updated photos and things with the council. So you can get your rehab permits and start rehabbing even if you don't have ideal outdoor caging. You can start as a novice with the understanding that you're going to follow ethical things, and if you can't see an animal through to the end of its rehab, you're going to network and work with other people, right? But once you're ready to upgrade to general, you should have some of that built in, and you should kind of be a little bit more established, at least than you were when you were a novice. Again, it's not super intimidating. These people want you to upgrade to a general rehab permit. They want you to keep growing and expanding, but it's just to make sure that you really are doing what you're supposed to be doing. It's not like you've like broken laws, right, while you had your novice permit, those kind of things. So it does involve a second interview with the council. Okay? And it's once you have that general rehab permit, that is the point when you can then apply for your RVS permit and your threatened and endangered species permit if you have the necessary training and experience to do so. Yeah, so I think we already talked about all the things I was going to talk about here. If you do have questions on how to take the training for either of those, especially because I would suspect that stuff is just a little bit wonky with so COVID regulations and those kind of things might be different. But if you do want to take threatened and endangered species and you're a permitted rehabilitator especially and are ready for that, or if rabies vector species are on your mind as what you would want to do, reach out to the council and just contact with them on how that training is currently happening and when the next one is, so that you're ready to get it when it is offered. Okay, let's talk about then the other state permits that we have, which are our amphibian and reptile permits from the Fish and Boat Commission. Again, this is the application form. It is like smaller than a form that you fill in the doctor's office, right? There's not a lot of information that's on there. Just want to know, are you doing a new permit or a permit renewal? And then given kind of your basic information. So for these fish and boat permits as well, there's additional information that you want to send in with this piece of paper. Okay, so again, you want to do kind of a cover letter. You want to say why you want to become a rehabilitator, what experience do you have. You can put kind of a little resume together, right? That's what I did to send that in to Fish and Boat. You need to send in that letter from the township saying that wildlife rehab is not prohibited on your property. Okay, probably the same one you had from the PA Game Commission if you're doing all the permits, but it's the same kind of setup. You need a letter from your sponsoring rehabilitator. Again, that person must have reptile and amphibian permits, so it can't be any rehabilitator. It does need to be someone that has reptile and amphibian permits. You need a sponsoring veterinarian, again, saying they're going to see your rehab patients, maybe specifically reptiles and amphibians if the letter is not worded that way, one that you already have. You do need to send in proof of a fishing license. So I mean, it's like $20-something, not astronomical, but you do need to purchase a fishing license if you don't normally, and you need to send in a copy of that signed when you send in your permits, okay? And then you also want to send in Fish and Boat, because there is no council interview for that, and there's no like over the phone interview, anything. You want to send in pictures of kind of what equipment you're going to use, what facilities you have. I think in our application too, we talked about like, we don't have a tub right now big enough for a 30-pound snapping turtle, but if we get one, here's where I would go to buy one, and I could get it same day and those kind of things. So stuff like that. I mean, just making it clear that you know what you're doing. You've got stuff together. You're not just some Yahoo that's going to put turtles in his kitchen sink, right? I don't know. When you send in your permit to Fish and Boat, you need to be prepared to wait. It took us about 9 months until we heard anything from Fish and Boat related to our permits. We really even couldn't get through to contact anybody to ask if the application packet even ever arrived, and it took about 9 months for them to get here. And that seems to be the experience of everybody kind of across the board. From my knowledge from our game warden, the Game Commission treats their permits as part of their legal division. So they're very on top of it. Just a different system as far as how they manage those and who's really in charge of that. Fish and Boats permits are more, clerical is probably not the right word, but it's from their permitting division, not a law enforcement standpoint. So it's not as fast of a process. They just don't have the manpower and the people and the time dedicated to it that maybe we would like them to have. So if you're going to send in those permits, just again, be prepared. That's why we did not purchase a bazillion reptile supplies, is because we knew that we had some time to acquire those items before we got our permits, right? So again, just something to keep in mind. It may take some time for that piece. All right, now we can talk about your federal permit application. So this is if you want to do migratory birds. So if you want to do birds of prey, songbirds, water birds, you also need a federal permit. So you're going to need that state permit first, and then your federal permit, okay? When you send in your federal permit and you get the application for this one, and you can just get this online, you don't have to like request it anywhere. It is much more detailed than like the state ones that we have. So instead of having to do like the big cover letter, a lot of those questions that they want you to answer are built into the application form itself. So it's the same kind of information really that they're going to ask you for, but it's already built into the form, so you don't necessarily have to remember a lot of that auxiliary stuff. And it, again, the other things that we're going to talk about to send in with your application, that's listed on the form itself, so that is there for you. There is a fee associated with submitting your fish and wildlife permits, your federal permits. I think they just recently moved to like a more electronic system, so I don't know if it's going to make it more or less, but it should be like less than $100. It's not astronomical to apply for your permits, right? So what you're going to send in addition to that big long application form, is a letter from the sponsoring rehabilitator that's familiar with your experience again and is willing to work with you kind of on a continuing basis, right, as you're getting your feet on the ground on your own and those kind of things. You're going to need that letter from a sponsoring veterinarian again, so make sure that you have that good relationship built in there. And then you do want to send photos and descriptions of your facility and your caging to U.S. Fish and Wildlife. U.S. Fish and Wildlife is specific in their application and in their instructions that they do use the NWRA minimum standards for caging when they are considering your facilities that you have designed, right? So when you are designing facilities and you're getting ready to send them things, you want to reference that document as well, so you can make sure you're describing things correctly, giving them all the information that they need and are asking for in the application, and that you meet at least some of the minimum standards. If I want to do birds of prey, I do not have to have a 100-foot eagle flight pen built in order to apply for my raptor permits, right? That's like the free flight permit size for an eagle is like 100 feet. If I meet maybe the restricted exercise section, that might be okay for what I'm applying for. If I meet the free flight specifications for like screech owls or barred owls, some of those smaller things, I don't have to meet the criteria for everything. I don't have to meet the criteria taken like swans if I want to do mallards. Okay, so keep that in mind. You need to meet some of the minimum standards, but it's not like you need to have one of everything that's listed in the minimum standards. Okay. This is a plug from the standards. They have caging requirements and things too for mammals and for reptiles and things. So if you are building stuff or sending in photos like with your permits, again, that's not a bad resource to consult. The state agencies don't specifically call that out, if I remember correctly, but it's minimum standards from the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association. So we should kind of be using that as a benchmark. Okay. Education and non-releasable permits. This is common for people to get their educational use of wildlife permits if they're going to do rehab, but it is not a requirement. You do not need to or want to keep non-releasable wildlife if you don't want to. You don't have to do that, okay? But there are permits that you need if that is something that interests you, either now or in the future when you get that animal that you think makes a good candidate to stay in captivity that cannot be released. Okay, so for the state, for mammals and birds, again through the PA Game Commission, it's the educational use of rehabilitation wildlife is the permit that you need. There's also federal permits from the USDA for mammals and US Fish and Wildlife for birds that you should have as well, especially if you're taking those animals to programs and things. Definitely make sure you have like USDA involved in stuff. But federal permits, again, they cover everything birds, so anything you're doing with birds, there's going to be a federal permit as well. If you want to keep reptiles, you need an amphibian and reptile educator possession permit. And again, both of those are going to be specific to these are the species you can have, this is the number of animals that you can have. Okay, so keep that in mind. The state, we also have salvage permits, which allow you to keep items, so like a skull of something or whatever, or fur and those kind of things. That allows you to have some more permitting. That way that you can keep those artifacts that for like the general public, they're not allowed to keep some of those kind of things. Okay. Federal wise, again, if I'm going to be keeping migratory birds, I need a migratory bird special permit possession, special purpose possession permit. That is hard to say. That's what you need from the feds. It's a similar kind of looking application to the rehab permit one. And then USDA covers animal exhibitors. I do not do, and we do not do like traveling education programs. We generally don't keep non-releasable mammals. So I don't know a lot about the USDA permits just on a personal level. I also know that there's some talk that they would be changing a little bit to, I think, have more regulatory input. So if you're going to keep mammals that are wildlife, you also need to be in touch with the USDA as well, right? So I'm not the best person to ask about those nitty-gritty details, but that is one of the requirements there too. Okay. So that is all that I'm going to talk about as far as the wildlife rehab permitting process. Again, you have that handout where I list all of those items for every single rehab permit and what you need to do and how you can do that, and kind of just some of the tips and tricks that I have for someone that just in the last few years went through that process and just did this, right? So that is all there for you. Again, this is not the talk for education permits. Again, we don't do education programs. I have at other organizations, but I maybe am not the best person to ask about that. But it goes along a lot of times with rehab, so it was worth mentioning. Now what I want to talk about is the process for nonprofit incorporation. Again, this is not a necessity. If you just want to do wildlife rehab, you do not need to incorporate as a nonprofit. You only need to incorporate as a nonprofit if you want to run a nonprofit organization, okay? I mean, you don't even really have to run it. You could start it and turn it over to a board. If you have the drive and the mission to be a founder of a nonprofit, that is one of your options, but it is not a requirement. You do not need to do that to do rehab. Okay, so we talked about those things in the beginning. Again, this could be a whole topic on itself, a whole entire presentation. I want to kind of go through some of these things because I know that people always have questions on it. And again, we just did this like a little over a year ago. So it is still very fresh in my brain. So I want to talk about it, but we're not going to go into as much detail as some of those other things. Okay. The one other thing to keep in mind with the incorporation process here is that there are costs kind of every step of the way. So you do have to pay like a pretty decent application fee for your 501c3 and state application, charity, registration, blah, blah, blah. You have to pay for those things. So just keep that in mind. This stuff is not free. You generally need some funding to be ready to do this. Okay. So first thing you want to do, or one of the first things you want to do, is register your name. And a lot of times that's kind of lumped in with some of these other processes. You need to have that name registered already or be registering the name. So that's where you get to pick Silly Squirrel, Wildlife Rehab, or whatever I suggested to you in the beginning. This is where you would pick the name of your nonprofit, your legal name for your nonprofit. Okay. You then can register for an EIN. That's your employer identification number. And you do have to have one of these, even if you are not going to have employees ever. It's basically like your social security number almost, kind of like for your nonprofit. So once you have your name and kind of yourself set up, you need to apply for one of those EINs. You need to have board members. So to apply both to the state to be a nonprofit and to apply to the federal government to be a 501c3, you have to have board members. So I just said those words and I will explain them. So the state is what gives you status as a nonprofit or like an LLC or some other for-profit corporation. If you want to have tax exemption status where you are tax exempt and potentially donations to you are tax deductible, that is through the feds, and that is your 501c3 is generally what people get if you're doing wildlife rehab charitable stuff. Okay. Again, you don't have to have both of those, but if you are going to incorporate with the state, if you want to get the 501c3, which you probably do if you're going to be a nonprofit, you have to have board members. These requirements are different between the state and the feds, and they are different for every single state. So in your handouts, where I talk about nonprofit stuff, and again, I have actually more details in the handout probably than I do that I'll cover here because I'm already talking for so terribly long, just like the last presentation. You have to have a certain number of board members. You have to have them be non-related, so it can't be like you and your 2 children, right? They need to be people that are going to be responsible for the nonprofit, making sure that it's doing the legal things it's supposed to do, fiscally responsible, yada, yada, yada. Board members look different in every organization, whether they're going to be involved in the day-to-day work of your rehab or not, whether you are going to be on the board or if you're going to be an employee. Those are different people. You should not be both, just as a best practice and in some cases legal requirements. So just keep that in mind. It's going to be more than just you. You need to have those people kind of in your team to get ready to do that. Articles of incorporation, then that is what you submit to the state to become a nonprofit. It's not a super long document or really complicated, really too much, but that is what will give you kind of your status as a corporation, as an organization that exists, in addition to that EIN number. There are then requirements to advertise. So you have to advertise in a newspaper and a legal journal, if I'm remembering correctly, 2 different sources that you exist now and you've incorporated and all of those fun things. So you do have to put that out there to the public saying, hey, we're here now, we're the new nonprofit, this is our legal name, we incorporate on this date, blah, blah, blah. There's wording that you can follow. You then want to decide on what your official mission statement is going to be, especially if you are going to apply for your 501c3, that federal tax exemption status. That's part of the gigantic application that you get to put together for them. But this is where you can say, okay, are we an organization that just does wildlife rehab? Are we an organization that does wildlife rehab and education? Are we an organization that just does education, right? Maybe you don't want to rehab animals and you just want to be like an education center, okay? And then you can start a nonprofit that way. This is different for everybody. There are lots of resources online as far as places where you can go to like learn about how to write a mission statement and stuff. I'm not going to link any one in particular, but if you Google like mission statement writing, how to write a mission statement, there are lots of really good resources that were helpful to me as we wrote our mission at West Shore, and that you might do that. So ours is inspiring coexistence between people and wildlife. Our mission is not to rehab every animal in the state. It is not to provide education programs and touch so many people. It is to inspire people to coexist with the animals that already exist in their backyard, and we've decided that wildlife rehab and some of our other programs are one of the avenues that we're going to use to do that. Okay? So your mission could be whatever you want to. Your mission could be to rehab all of the squirrels. Okay, it is specific to you and your organization and what your board of directors wants. Then need to have bylaws. So this is like the operating document of your nonprofit. So it will go through like how your board members are selected, who those people should be. You have like a whistleblower, conflict of interest policy usually in your bylaws. You have the setup of your organization. Are you a membership organization or not? So there's lots of information that goes into bylaws. I will say that I heavily relied on Wildlife EDU, again, Peggy Hence's program through Red Creek, where they have training classes. She also has one about nonprofits as well, and she has some documents that she can share, and we heavily relied on her bylaws documents. So that's a good contact for that, or taking that training as well to have access to some of those resources, or you can write them yourself. Yours could be totally different than the ones that other people use, and you can write those yourself. Again, there's resources online that kind of walk you through that, or you can use a lawyer as well. If you know a lawyer, if you are a lawyer, you can probably do it yourself. Okay, 501c3 then, again, this is the status that gives you tax exemption status with the federal government. There are other 501c whatevers, but 501c3 is the charitable organization. It's generally what you're going to be if you're doing wildlife rehab or wildlife education probably. It is a very large application packet, and the feds change the requirements all the time. So it used to be on paper, it is now virtual, so it's digital. There used to be one application, there are now 2 different applications. There's an easy and a longer form. Again, the website, it's Harbor Compliance is what I linked to specifically in the handouts. They have all of these items step by step with the links to the exact form that you need, where you need to go and fill those out. So definitely check that out if you're going to do your 501c3. We did the long form. We sent in our application. This is like the saddest moment of my life, like 2 months before they switched to being all digital. So we did it on paper and sent that in. And I think it was like $600 was the application fee. I don't know if that's more or less now than it's going digital. But again, just check the IRS website, check that Harbor Compliance, and they keep that up to date more than I'm gonna keep up to date on that because I already applied for it. So I don't necessarily need to think about it anymore. Okay, so that's all that I'm going to talk about as far as nonprofit incorporation. Again, that could be its whole own separate training. I just want to give you that flavor. Harbor Compliance is going to be your resource that I would recommend for that. There's also other ones. There's PANO, which is the PA nonprofit organization. And I'm also happy to talk with you one-on-one. So if you are at a point where you think that is an option for you and something that you want to explore, or you have questions about it or whatever, again, we just did that process and we are still kind of boots on the ground getting ourselves set up as a nonprofit organization. We're pretty well along now, but I am happy to talk to anyone personally one-on-one more specific about that too, or if you have questions or whatever. Okay, let's just touch on briefly then some ongoing requirements. So your state permits, both the PA Game Commission and Fish and Boat have annual reports that we have to submit. And then the feds, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, we have annual reports for that as well. Okay. There are specific items that you need to report when you send these in. So who brought you the animal, when they brought it to you, why, what was your diagnosis of it, what happened to the animal, when did that happen to it, where did it come from. So take a look at the annual reports that we have to send in if you've never seen those before, so you know what information to collect, or work with the rehabilitator that you're training with so you know what that information is. Okay. If you want to be a nonprofit as well, you obviously need to file your taxes. It's Form 990. There's a bunch of different forms of the Form 990 that you might qualify for and get to file. So keep that in mind as well. These are annual requirements that you will be doing if you fall into any of these categories. All of these also have requirements as far as renewals. So I need to renew my state permits, I need to renew my federal permits, and those are on different schedules. So just keep that in mind. Look at the permit that they send you. Sometimes has the expiration date, or it's like written out for you like this expires in 2 years or whatever, and you need to send in a renewal, and that looks different again for every organization. Okay. Well, all right. So now that we've kind of talked about the nitty-gritty, and again, I want to emphasize that document. I think I covered everything that's in it, but if there's stuff that I missed or whatever, check that out first, and then again, please feel free to reach out to me if you have further questions or want me to clarify anything, and I am happy to do that. I just want to go through now a little bit on training and continuing education resources, because I think we would be missing a big portion if we didn't talk about this, right? So we can talk about how to get your permits, but if you've never done wildlife rehab before and you don't volunteer somewhere currently, you're probably like, whoa, how do I get a sponsoring rehabilitator letter? How do I get the minimum number of hours that I need for my U.S. Fish and Wildlife permits? Okay, so I want to talk about what are some of the ways that we can do that. As a wildlife rehabilitator, your hands-on experience is going to be the most valuable. So I could lecture you all day, every day on how to rehab baby bunnies, but until you get a baby rabbit in your hands and you see how they act and you see how to tube them and you see how they grow and what they should look like when they're released, there's no way to give that to you in a totally virtual format. A lot of those virtual things, I'm going to show you some of my favorite resources for that, and they are super valuable. But your hands-on training, that is the most valuable for you. My suggestion is to get experience at as many places as you possibly can. You can work with just one wildlife rehabilitator, especially if you're limited geographically and there is only one wildlife rehabilitator near you. That might be the best option for you. But if you have the capacity that you can do internships elsewhere, if you have the capacity that you can go and take, a job or do like a 3-month seasonal position out of state, if you can do an internship here or there, especially at places that can offer you housing or a stipend, I highly, highly recommend that. That is something that I was lucky enough to have and did not understand the value of that until after it had already happened. But that is really super helpful, and it just brings everything together for you, and then you can get different experiences. If you're training under somebody that doesn't do birds and you want to do birds, you need that hands-on experience with what you want to rehab now and in the future. Okay, so practice, practice, practice. Get that hands-on experience. I'm also going to recommend that you practice the commitment as well. So if you're saying, okay, I want to rehab squirrels, and you volunteer once a week at a wildlife center, that is not rehabbing squirrels. You need to, in whatever way makes it possible. Again, I know some of you are 2 hours away from the closest wildlife center. You need to practice what that commitment looks like before you go through and you get your permits and you set up caging and you buy all these things and whatever. You want to practice that before it happens. So whether that's subpermitting, if you're not going to stay as a subpermitting, maybe you like that setup and you stay there, or if it's volunteering for 3 months every single night so that you kind of get a feel of what that's going to feel like when it's your baby squirrels that are at your house or whatever, right? I use them as an example just because so many people do squirrels. There's so many of them, these squirrels out there. So that is going to be my recommendation as well for you. If you're looking for opportunities for hands-on training in Pennsylvania, the PAWR.com, I think it's .com and .org, website, that's the PA Wildlife Rehabilitators website. That is going to be your resource that lists all of the rehabilitators that are in Pennsylvania. Again, not every county has one. I know some of you probably are 2 hours away from the closest one, but that is where you're going to want to go to find somebody to get hands-on training here in Pennsylvania. If you are looking for internships or potentially a job that you can go and do for a period of time, or if that's the way that you want to rehab, you want to look for a job, the NWRA, it's nwrawildlife.org, I believe, the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association, they have a job opportunities like job search, like other jobs other websites do. So you can go there, you can say what it is that you're looking for, what location, or you can just pull up all the listings and you can see, okay, who's offering an internship, which one has stipends or housing offered, how long are they, who has jobs that I can go and take and can learn some new things. So those are the two places that I would recommend for finding those hands-on training. Okay. I'm also going to offer this mostly as a reward for listening to me talk for an hour and 40 minutes. That's terrible. We have found it really valuable at West Shore to have other wildlife rehabilitators come to us. At least I have found that very valuable. So we have some volunteers that have experience at other wildlife centers or were rehabilitators in other states. We're interns for a few months and at least kind of know what other wildlife centers do. That has been hugely valuable for us. So we are more than welcome to have other rehabilitators come and volunteer with us for a portion of time, right, that maybe aren't going to be like our normal scheduled volunteers. Or if you're at a point where you are nearly ready to get your permits, we're happy to have you as well to share experiences too, right? Even if we're not taking normal volunteers, which sometimes we can't. We love to share experiences back and forth. I love that. So we are welcome to hosting anybody or trading experiences and stuff, because again, that hands-on training, there's nothing like it, right? Okay. Conferences, so you are already probably doing that if you're listening to this training. You may or may not. Maybe you're listening to this some other time just for funsies. But you're probably doing the PAWR conference and doing that training. There's lots of conferences that you can go to. So there's this one in PA that's like every other year. There's New York ones, Virginia ones are pretty good. There's the national one, right? There's lots of them. I have a resource for you in the handouts that gives you a hyperlink to find basically all of the different conferences that are offered here in the United States and internationally as well, if you want to like have a dream of going to Rehab Sloss like I do. Okay. Look for scholarships and sponsorships for these. So like Virginia Wildlife Center, at least in 2020, had scholarships for PA rehabilitators and capture and transport rehabilitators that you could do that conference for free. Especially this year that it was virtual, you didn't even have to pay for a hotel, right? You could do that in your home. So these are really nice for learning new things because rehab is changing so very, very fast, and for networking as well. So my go-to groundhog person, when I get a goofy groundhog in, which is all of them, I met her at a rehab conference, right? She did a talk on groundhogs. We still connect on a regular basis through lots of different stuff. So it's really nice for networking, and that the value of that as well cannot be overstated. I did that in the last presentation too. Just ignore me when I say words that don't seem like they're correct. All right, this slide here, I put up with some online training resources for you that I like. So Wildlife EDU, that again is the one through Red Creek Wildlife Center. So it's nice specific stuff to Pennsylvania, and then also some general things as well, even if you're not in PA, but if you are, that's a really great resource for stuff specific to Pennsylvania. The International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council, which again is an international group rather than just our national United States one, they have some online trainings as well as sometimes they offer in-person trainings and conferences and stuff, so you can go to their website and find that out. The Certified Wildlife Rehabilitator website, you'll see that listed twice in the handouts for you, both for online trainings and for conferences. So becoming a certified wildlife rehabilitator, that is a separate certification that you can get from the IWRC. It's an attempt to standardize protocols or certifications across state, not protocols, but like certifications across state. So PA permitting requirements are very different than like Virginia permitting requirements. So this is supposed to be kind of a standard across state and international lines as well. But they have continuing education requirements, so they maintain a list of all of these conferences that exist and all of these online trainings that exist. And it is a huge, really, really massive list. So if you are tired of your normal trainings that you take or you're looking for new opportunities, that's a great resource as well. The Raptor Center, again, specific stuff is going to be to raptors, but they are a really great resource. And then the Wildlife Care Academy, that's through Wildlife Center of Virginia. And they, it's a newer program, their Wildlife Care Academy. It's a couple years old now, but they are expanding the classes that they offer. I have not taken any of their classes personally, but just looking at what they offer and what I know from like conference presentations from their rehabilitators, I would suspect that they are pretty good quality as well. And they're They do basics as well as through like more advanced techniques. So it's kind of nice. They have a wide range there kind of for everybody. And they're not too expensive, which is good. Print resources. So if you were a giant book nerd like me, I love getting my hands on like a new rehab book, right? I don't even care if it's like 30 years old and has no valuable information in it anymore. I still want to have it, okay? So print resources, I listed a ton of these, again, because I really like them in my handouts to you. This is just 3 of them. So the minimum standards, again, that has a lot of good information that really every rehabilitator should have a copy of that. Hand rearing birds. So this was just introduced to me this year, and it is my new best friend for birds, especially since that is definitely my weakest point is songbirds. I cannot recommend that book enough. Really, really nice from a rehab standpoint. I also absolutely love Answering the Call of the Wild. This is from the Toronto Wildlife Center, so it is Canada wildlife, but most of it overlaps with what we've got here in Pennsylvania and in the Northeast. But it's how to answer wildlife calls. So if somebody calls you about a heron that they found orphan and you're like, what the heck do I say? You can look it up in this book. It'll give you what questions to ask, common troubleshooting situations, ID questions that you can ask to make sure that's what they have and it's not like a pigeon, okay? So I really love that book. It is a large book and it's kind of expensive, but these are the 3 that I highlighted on purpose because they're like my 3 best friends, but there are tons of books that I really enjoy as well. And again, I talked about this a little bit in the other presentation that I did. Your bigger benefit is going to be knowing where to find the information, not trying to memorize it all. So I don't want to have to write a 300-page textbook on songbirds, but I want to have all of the information that's contained within a 300-page textbook on songbirds. So having that is way more valuable than me trying to learn that on my own and memorize it if they've already got it written out for me. Okay, so again, there's a lot of that in the handouts, which is nice. I want to highlight nonprofit stuff as well. Again, I think sometimes rehabilitators fall into the trap of they want to get paid for their services, which you should, and they want to start a wildlife center because that's kind of what we do, but you need to be prepared to run a nonprofit business. I don't have a business degree in nonprofit management. I have some experience at the other nonprofits that I've been with, but they've also been very much learning from the ground up, flying by the seat of their pants like we love to do as rehabilitators. So that has been hugely beneficial to me, but most of what we do at West Shore Wildlife Center and things are all best practices just based on the industry itself. And as an industry as a whole, I can tell you, the nonprofit industry knows that it's people with a lot of passion that start nonprofits. It's not business owners, right? So these are just some of the things that I highlighted here. Again, all of these are in the handout. So the Nonprofit Management 101, I found that to be a really valuable book, and I have tons of books that I still have to read that I don't have time to read that I think are going to be valuable as well. So there's lots of options there. I've enjoyed podcasts. So there's a lot of consultants in the nonprofit world, and they do podcasts and share that information for free. So I found those to be very helpful, especially from like a fundraising standpoint and board development and things. And then again, PANO is the Pennsylvania Association of Nonprofit Organizations. They're our state group, and they have a lot of resources as well. There's a lot of other things that you can find on the internet, just making sure that you're getting reputable resources. But PANO wants to help you. You can pay a membership fee. You probably also have a nonprofit organization locally to you or in your county that, again, you can join them and you can get a lot of knowledge from them as well. So don't discount that knowledge base that you also need to learn. If you're going to do rehab and start a nonprofit, you need to have nonprofit knowledge in addition to all the rehab knowledge that you need to get and continue to get as well, right? Both industries are always changing. Whoa, PowerPoint slides just something crazy. I don't know if that came through on the video or not, but just something crazy. Okay, these important contexts here, I just, again, listed these for purposes of continuing education, important people that it is to have as a contact for you when you don't know where to find the information or you don't have the information, because nobody can know all of the information. There just is too much. There's too much, okay? So the PA Wildlife Rehab Council, again, that's our state group that is an advocate for wildlife rehabilitators and has a lot of knowledgeable rehabilitators on it, especially if the questions on like regulations and what you need to do. You can contact them, so they're listed on that PAWR website. There's their email. Other rehabilitators are going to be a great resource for you. So whoever you're working with for training, other rehabilitators that you can get connected with through conferences or other means of networking are really good. And then your game warden is a really good resource as well. So don't discount that. Relationship with your game warden, we absolutely love our game warden that's here on a regular basis and other ones, but they are a great resource. Like if I'm not sure on some regulation-y type things, or where should I release this animal that's really weird, like where are other ones, they can connect you with biologists and do different things that you just don't have the power to do, right? Because they're in a different realm than most of us are. So my last handful of slides here, oh my god, it's gonna be 2 hours just like the other one. I apologize everybody that you have to listen to me talk so long, but you don't have to listen to the whole thing. I won't be offended. The last couple of slides that I had on here was just some tips for you. Again, as somebody that just went through this process that I found were helpful for us and that I think will be helpful for you, right? So it's just a small handful. Again, all of these are in that handout as well. If you're tired of listening to me talk and don't want to listen to me, that's also fine, okay? My first tip for you is don't be overwhelmed by it all. So it is a lot that you need to do, especially if you do want to do a lot of different species and do the nonprofit stuff. There is a ton that you have to do. It is a lot. It's going to take you a long time. But make yourself a list, right? Use the handout as a guide that I have for you. Find other resources online that you like that lay things out nicely for you. Make a to-do list of the things like, okay, I need to put caging in my rehab room. I need to buy these supplies. I need to ask this person for a donation, whatever. Like whatever it looks like for you. If you're a list person like I am, write it all down, and I promise you, you will check things off way faster than you think that you're going to, okay? My other recommendation is you want to have a separate phone for your wildlife rehab. Whether you are going to be an independent rehabilitator and just do it on your own, or if you're going to be a nonprofit, you need to have a separate phone number. Do not use your personal phone number for wildlife rehab for a couple of reasons. One, if you decide not to rehab anymore or whatever, people, as soon as they call you, they have saved your number in their phone. So they're going to continue to call you on wildlife calls, and then you're going to have grumpy people that you have to say, no, I don't rehab anymore, or whatever. Or maybe you're taking a break for half a year or something like that for personal reasons. You need a separate number so that you don't have to change your personal phone number when you stop rehabbing. You also want to think about setting limits for yourself. So again, if I'm going to be closed for 3 months, I want my voicemail to say, hey, we're closed for 3 months. You need to go to this resource and find somebody else. I don't want to have to be answering those calls on top of dealing with whatever's making me be closed for 3 months. Okay. We use our phone to screen calls really heavily, so we don't take certain species, and I don't want to have to tell people no because they get mad and I feel bad saying no, and I just can't return 5,000 calls a day. So our phone screens people out and says, hey, if you've got this animal, you need to call somewhere else. We can't take it. Okay? So I use Google Voice, so this is just my personal recommendation, but you can use something different. If you're using it for personal use, it's free. If it's for business, it's $10 a month, and it is an online system, so you can like log into it online and like answer text messages and things. And then you could call also through like a computer, or you could have it ring on your cell phone, so it'll come up as like Google Voice number blah blah blah, and then you know it's someone calling your rehab and not calling you personally for probably your car's extended warranty is all the calls that I get anymore, right? But then you have that separate number, you can have separate voicemails, you can screen calls differently, you can turn it off when you want to. So that is my big recommendation for you. People have made that mistake, okay? Finding supplies, this also feels very overwhelming because especially if you're going to do lots of different things, you need lots of different supplies. But it really is probably not going to be as expensive as you think it is. You will find supplies just by asking. Ask other rehabilitators if they have supplies to give to you. So probably somebody got like 5,000 insulin syringes donated and they would love to give you some. Or someone has boxes of baby blankets that they can't use fast enough and they would love to give you some, okay? You're not probably going to find formula that way maybe, right? But you'll find some of these other things. We personally have also had really great success networking with other animal rescue groups. We did find $400 worth of formula that was donated to a dog rescue that they could not use that formula, but it was something that was appropriate for wildlife that we were able to use for our patients, right? We have like buckets of trash bags that another organization used. They only wanted the one certain size. They got a different size. We wanted that size and they were happy to donate them to us. No one wants to store crap that they can't use, but it is hard to say no when a donor shows up with supplies for you, and you will have that as well. So we want to share. We still want it to go to good use. So ask people, ask SPCA, hey, do you get any kinds of dog food that you don't use that maybe I could use for my wildlife? And then we'll give it to you, right? Because they want to give it to you. And especially if it's not something they can use and further their mission, they're more than happy to support another animal related mission, okay? Ask family and friends to check their basements for old rabbit cages that they don't need anymore. Okay. We did a round of friends and family fundraising when we launched the rehab at our current location. So we weren't even launching a business. It was just me launching the rehab, and we were able to raise $1,000 to purchase formula and medications from our vet and those things that we needed. So keep that in mind as well too. I mean, make your case, and people want to support you if they have the ability to do that. People also love convenience. So if you can find things on Amazon and make an Amazon wish list, again, even if it's just personal for you as like a Subpermitting if you're able to fundraise, or as an independent rehabilitator, not even a nonprofit, people love to buy crap off Amazon and send it to you. It's very convenient. It's very easy for them to do, especially with Prime shipping. They know the price. They can see it right there. They don't have to go to the store. They can send it to you. We have had success. Anything that's listed under $10 on our Amazon wish list, someone is going to snap it up like that. Especially if I can say, hey, this is for this specific purpose. It's for this patient that we have right now. Does anyone have $10 to go and buy a bag of nuts, right? Or whatever it is that you need. So we have found that to be really successful. You may as well, again, especially if you're going to do a nonprofit and be fundraising and can find things on Amazon. People like to buy stuff off of Amazon. So even if you're just asking your friends for help, that's a good option there for you. My other recommendation is to keep your finances separate for wildlife rehab versus everything else, or at least keep an idea of what you are spending. If you're going to be a nonprofit, that's a requirement, right? So you have to have separate business accounts and blah, 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 taxes and keep track of all that stuff. Even if you're just going to do it on your own as a hobby, or if you're going to like be a Subpermitting and you're going to be expected to pay for some of your expenses, you should keep track of what that is costing you, because I personally care about you, and I don't want you to get in a hole where you are not able to pay for the things that you need to live as a normal human being here in Pennsylvania because you're dumping all this money into animals. It also makes it nice if you do need to ask for supports from the public, from your friends and family. If you're a Subpermitting, make sure it's clear ahead of time. Are you paying for items, or is the organization that you're working with paying for stuff? That should be set up ahead of time. And I can give you my 2 cents on that too some other time. But if you are spending exorbitant amounts of money and you need to ask that organization for support, you want to have the money to back that up. So I just think that's a good idea for yourself, even if it's just like a simple Excel spreadsheet or flagging things on your bank statements. I don't think that's a bad idea to do, even if you're not going to be a nonprofit. Okay. All right, so last couple of slides, I just had some other like parting things that I really just felt like I should speak out into the universe to you. One, brand new wildlife rehabilitator to potentially aspiring wildlife rehabilitators, or those of you that are going to be training new wildlife rehabilitators, just things that kind of came to my mind, okay? Your wildlife rehab journey, the way that you end up there, what you look like as a wildlife rehabilitator does not need to look like anybody else. You do not need to burn out killing yourself just because the rehabilitator that you work with does. You do not need to work 365 days a year taking animals just because other rehabilitators do. You can specialize in certain species. You can say no when you hit a certain number of animals. You can close to take that beach vacation that you want to take in the summer. You can have off hours. You can close. You can turn off your phone and not answer that call at midnight that comes through. You can say that you are not going to go out and capture and transport stuff. You can offer different programs if you're a nonprofit versus what other organizations do. I really, 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 truly think that there is a way that wildlife rehab can fit for everybody. We just have to be advocates for ourselves, to set boundaries so that you can be an active participant in wildlife rehab and not meet the criteria of someone that doesn't work, has all this space, you know what I mean, et cetera, can fund it. There is some way that it can work into your life. You just need to find that organization that you can work with, or you need to figure out how that looks for you. Okay? More boundary stuff, right? So setting boundaries, it is important for you. It is important for others. It is important for your family. It is important to the wildlife in your care. It is important to us as other rehabilitators in Pennsylvania. We do not want to lose you 1 year after you start rehabbing because you thought that you could take every baby squirrel and you didn't understand when you have 80 squirrels what that really looks like on a day-to-day basis. Again, some of these boundaries that you want to set, you need to have the knowledge to be able to set those, and you need someone to be able to hold you accountable. If you say, I am going to take a family vacation once a year, you need someone to hold you accountable to that. That is kind and is understanding of wildlife rehab and the nature of being an emergency room that comes with that. But you need to set those boundaries, and you need to set them before you start. So what species are you going to take? How many animals is too many animals? Are you going to keep non-releasable animals or not? Don't wait until you have a non-releasable animal to decide if you want to keep it or not. Have a plan before that happens, right? So I personally have made promises to my family as far as what is going to be family time, what is going to be rehab time. You know, I mean, I am not going to be tied to the house in the baby season. And we joke about it. We take a vacation in February every year because like our last hoorah to go and do something before baby season starts. They understand that commitment and are supportive in that. But they are also there to tell me, hey, you have 50 animals, it's time to close. You cannot take any more. We're here to help you make that decision because it is hard to make for yourself. You need someone to hold you accountable to that beforehand so that you're ready to go. Okay, so just again, something that you want to think about. I think we talked a little bit more about this in my first presentation. It's all about soul searching and making those decisions, but it's worth mentioning here as well. Even if you are really at that point where you know this is what you want to do, boundaries are something that you need to think about. Okay? You are not responsible for every animal in the state of Pennsylvania. You are only responsible for the animals that are in your care. Okay? If you have spent any time in a wildlife rehab, you may have also seen this at other conferences and things. It's also a big thing in domestic animal rescues. Compassion fatigue and burnout are high. You are going to get burnt out of feeding the same stupid baby bird every 15 minutes, every single day of the week when you're seeing your family go to cookouts and people are doing different things and there's something else that you really want to do and it's the fourth person that's brought you a baby bird that's now dying and now your work is 10 times as hard. That sucks. It just sucks. It's part of the job. It is the way that it is, and it never gets better. Even if it gets more familiar and you have better techniques to deal with that, there are always those situations, and just the nature of doing it over and over and over again, and the suffering that we see from these animals that we love so much, even though we're here to ease that suffering, it is still suffering that we are seeing. That is going to burn you out. You need to understand where your limits are and that you are not responsible for every single animal in the state of Pennsylvania. Because you sign up for a rehab permit does not mean that you have to take every single animal that people call you about. If you are at your max physically, emotionally, mentally, whatever, that is your max and you should not go above that. You should not sacrifice self-care, time with your children, your job that you need to pay bills because of wildlife rehab, right? We make sacrifices enough to feed baby birds every 15 minutes from sunup to sundown, right? And drive them to where they need to be released and talk to people on the phone. You make enough sacrifices that you need to understand where your boundaries are physically that you're going to put in place, right? Figuratively and then physically and emotionally as well. So that is something that I am really proud of from a personal level, the boundaries that I have set, and I am not willing to die on the wildlife rehab cross, right? we are much more effective when we are doing things correctly. We can save way more animals if we are doing things the way that they should. Okay, so I am happy to talk to anybody anytime you feel like you are suffering with that, or if you're struggling to make those choices. I feel like we have done a really good job with that, and I had a really good team and support system behind me, so I am happy to talk to anybody about that as well when you are struggling in the moment and when you're kind of preparing to think about what that looks like for yourself. Okay, that is it for Reels. This is almost exactly as long as my first presentation talk. That is terrible. I said this one was going to be shorter, and it was a bold-faced lie. I should have known that. I have my email up here for you. Again, I don't think I have it in the presentation handouts. I might go back and add that in quick before I upload it here. I love to talk rehab, and I would like to think I'm a humble person, but here I am patting myself on the back. I am so proud of the job that we have done in acquiring our rehab permits and doing so successfully and starting our nonprofit and all the things that we have done in the last few years, that I would love to share everything that we have learned and that knowledge with you. I do not want to keep that. I do not need it. I do need some of it, but I want to share that with you, and I want to network. I want to learn from other people as well, and there's always something to give and to get. So I would be more than happy to talk to anybody. Again, I'm recording my presentations the end of January. So I don't know yet what the conference format's going to look like. If we're going to have a specific Q&A session, I would love to have a discussion section where we can talk a little bit, or maybe other rehabilitators can get involved and give their 2 cents as well, because again, this is just my perspective on things. But please, please, please feel free to reach out to me. Like I said, you're welcome to come in and see what we do and see our setup here at West Shore. If you're really someone who's in the world of wildlife rehab, we can't have just any old crazy person off the street here, right? But I would love to connect with all of you, and I'm happy to answer questions and be of whatever service I can be to get you out there and get you rehabbing, because we need you, and we would love to have you too. Okay? So that is where I will leave you. I hope that all of you have a wonderful conference if you're watching this during the PAWR conference, and that you learn good stuff. I'm excited about all the topics, and I look forward to connecting to all of you, hopefully in person someday, but virtually while we can. Thanks, everybody.